Just waiting for that green light. Here we go. Well, good morning, everybody. It is Thursday, January 11, 2024 already. It is 7:32 a.m. in the morning, and this is the Edina Housing and Redevelopment Authority meeting for the City of Edina. As Director Benarott mentioned, we do these meetings virtually and in live fashion, which is a hybrid for us. And you'll have, if you're listening in, an opportunity to call in for community comment. There are no public hearings this morning, so you'll have one opportunity to call in. There's the phone number to call in to, and a lot of numbers on the screen there to kind of digest and deal with. So if you want to call in, it's going to come up fairly quickly for community comment in the agenda. And having provided that information a second time here, I will now call the meeting to order and ask our Administrative Support Specialist, Liz Olson, to call the roll.
Commissioner Risser.
Here.
Commissioner Jackson.
Here.
Commissioner Pierce.
Here.
Commissioner Agnew.
Here.
Chair Hovland.
Here. Next is the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This morning we were planning on having I'd say the introductory sort of meeting for the year here and do some housekeeping type items right off the bat and then go into work session upstairs. But I think that when I looked at the agenda, the two agendas, and talked to Manager Neal, and I think he's talked to some of the other council members, it seemed that it was a better idea to just blend this and do it in open meeting form. So when we talk about approving the meeting agenda, I'd like to entertain a motion from one of the commissioners that we add the work session material into the main meeting here, and we will place that on the agenda after reports and recommendations before the executive director's comments. So is there someone who would care to make a motion to amend the meeting agenda to include the discussion of the 2024 state legislative agenda and affordable housing financing into the main HRA agenda this morning?
So moved. Second.
Member Agnew, Commissioner Agnew moves, Commissioner Jackson seconds. Motion is stated. All those in favor of adopting the amended agenda say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. All right, good. I think that's a efficient way to handle it, and I think having that conversation in light of the some of the challenges we've had around process and the issue itself, it's a good thing to be handling this in an open meeting where folks can listen more easily, and then also be recorded for folks that want to tune in a different fashion or pick it up later on through one of our electronic means. So let's then go to the community comment portion of the agenda, and we're back then. Let's put that number back on the screen again so we can let people know that might want to call in that they should get ready. And then I'm going to turn first to the audience.
Apologies, we're in chair, because by moving this item to the agenda, we essentially remove the opportunity that people could have to comment on the item we were going to work on in the work session. We also have notified the public that that item will be discussed at 8 o'clock. And so I'm worried about two things. And this came really quickly early in the morning. I haven't had my coffee, so I didn't raise an objection. But before we did this maneuver, people could have come forward and commented on what the work session was going to be about. So I don't know how to, I'm frustrated, and I know that we did take that vote, but again, changing things last minute does have consequences, and I'm now really seeing what that did. So I am wishing I had had more coffee this morning.
All right, fair point. Manager Neal?
Well, I would say normally we don't have participation, public participation at work sessions. But
Yeah,
we also...
That's not the point that the commissioner is making. I think she's thinking that because it wasn't on the main agenda and not scheduled for a future public hearing, that people could have commented on this matter this morning. And so it's a fair observation. So let's Maybe we can deal with that here as we get to the item.
But that has no bearing on what we would have done, right? I mean, I get the point, but if we were trying to address that, then this would have needed to been on the agenda a week ago, so that people would know, and then they could come in and speak to it.
I agree. People have been figuring it out online, though.
Yeah. So does that make what I'm saying make sense? That we would have done it a week ago to address Commissioner Richner's issue procedurally, so that people
Public
would
comment
know it's
situation would have been
there,
set.
and
That's right.
right.
Yeah, so that it would have provided more opportunity to comment on it.
But we can't do anything now to have people be able to comment
Yeah.
on it unless we push it.
I want to say that I am upset that we did this, that we moved this, and essentially cut off any opportunity people could have to come forward during public comment.
I can assure you that was not the intention, Commissioner. It was, my intention was to make sure, and I think everybody else's, was to have an open, recorded discussion about it. The point you're raising is a good one, but it's different than the reason that this was moved to the main agenda.
Well, I guess I'm just confused by the comment, because if we could decide right now to leave it as is and have the discussion as we had planned to, and nobody would be able to comment on it in that way either.
So if I could add some, I think, clarity.
Commissioner, go ahead.
I think the point is that people have potentially come here this morning because they saw the agenda online, thinking that they could comment on it because it wasn't on the agenda or scheduled for a future public hearing.
Yeah.
And so there might be people here already who now we are saying you can't speak to it. And so I think we could either address it in line, or we could just say, I don't know if we can make an exception to the rules today, just given the last minute change to the schedule. That might be an option.
We've got that.
It's your
We've got-
procedure, and so it's
Yeah,
at your
it's our
discretion.
meeting. We can decide how we want to manage that issue, but that's exactly the point I was making too, is that because it didn't fit into one of those traditional categories where you wouldn't be able to comment on it. Folks that are familiar with process thought they could comment on it this morning.
And can I add just one more
Go ahead.
point?
Commissioner, go ahead.
And then the reason, though, because I think this is important, I think sometimes because of the procedural challenges that we've had of late, things get misconstrued. The intent of this, moving it the way we did, was actually to make it easier for people to see it. And so that instead of just having comments recorded on audio, in this forum, there's video and there's audio. And it's easier to catalog it, and it's easier to find it so that people can hear it. It was the exact opposite of the reason we were trying to do it, is to provide more access, not less.
We don't have calendars in front of us. When's our next HRA meeting?
January 25th.
January what?
25th.
25th. Okay, the legislative session doesn't start until February 11th, I think. Another alternative would be to deal with the issue that Member Pierce raised for folks in our community that wouldn't understand the nuance of process, would be to hold this matter over for a discussion as part of our next agenda.
If I could
Ms.
make-
Olson, now what?
Sorry,
We
one
got another
comment.
idea.
This room will not be available that day
Pardon
due
me?
to AV updates, so we will not be available to meet in this room for the next meeting, if that makes any
Oh,
difference.
it could, yeah, of course. And then the first meeting in February is when?
February 15th.
And this will be open by then.
The problem with that idea is that then it's on the agenda, and then you really can't speak to it because it's on the agenda
If I
of the
may.
meeting. Yes, Commissioner.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I see two solutions. One is to waive the rules on community comment about items on the agenda. The second is to just continue to have a work session afterwards where we have the discussion, but just do it in this room. So either one of those, I think, solve the problem. But I don't think there's any harm done by waiving the rules on community comment about items on the agenda.
All right.
And for a one-time thing.
Okay. Yeah, no, I don't think there's any issue on that either. I'm just thinking about, remember Commissioner Pierce's comment about folks that may have wanted to participate that can't. That it was never intended for a public hearing matter either, so it ended up being a nuanced sort of issue here. So why don't, for the folks that have thought they could comment on this, that have come this morning, why don't we just let them comment on it? I think that's, then we've got a more complete record. And then we can have them comment during community comment.
That would be a really good solution.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And then we can take it up in due course at the end of the agenda, having absorbed all that information from our residents. And they've been writing in, of course, to us as well. So was there another part of it that you were? Yeah.
It was just the timing, because people were told it would be at 8.
Okay. All right. Well, they knew the meeting started at 7:30, so I don't think they'd wait until 8 to come. But let's go ahead then and move to community comment. And we have folks in the audience. I think we'll just if you want to comment on any issue that's of concern to you, please, we welcome your comments. So, welcome.
Good morning. Andy Brown, 5512 Park Place in Edina. I am extremely worried, I guess I can speak to this now, but about regarding 2.4 and 2.5, the request to our legislators to potentially have a deed tax and a tear-down tax. I feel it is extremely unfair on our senior population, as typically they need that equity to go to senior assisted living or other issues that they may have after committing a lifetime of support for this community. So I think there are many people in this community that have lived long and supportive of this community and lives regarding that, and it's completely unfair to even think about those two things, and they should be removed immediately. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Molly Cronin. I live at 10 Mara Lane, and I have lived in Edina for most of my life. I'm really disappointed in this council. It seems like twice in 3 weeks you have tried to sneak through a transfer tax and a demolition tax yet again this morning without allowing for public comment. The first time it was written off as a clerical error. That was right before Christmas, and I'm not sure what is going on today. I try to pay attention, but it's hard to keep up. So thank you for giving us the chance to speak this morning. It seems as though this council is working as hard as they can to add more taxes to single-family homeowners in this town. And why? It's probably because we're the easiest to bully. It's hard for a family with kids in schools to consider uprooting themselves to escape your ideological plans. Your strategy to build a $100 million slush fund is to bilk the single-family homeowners in Edina. You are again sneakily trying to add taxes that will hurt Edina residents and make Edina less attractive for future residents. It's unfortunate that this seems to be your focus. You are admirably passionate about creating new low-income housing while doing little to protect current residents. 2 new police officers at Southdale are not going to solve this problem. On Monday night, instead of watching the national championship, 50 residents in my neighborhood were on a Zoom call, and we were talking about how we can increase. We're talking about the recent increase in crime affecting our neighborhood in this town. I love the Edina police. They've been helpful to me many times, but they are stretched too thin. As a neighborhood, we are considering hiring off-duty police officers or other types of private security in order to prevent the rising tide of crime in our area. This will likely involve an expense of $3,000 to $5,000 per household for 6 months. This is in addition to the already heavy tax burden that we bear for living in Edina. The population of Edina has increased 15% over the last 7 years, yet you are patting yourselves on the back in all your publications for adding 2 police officers at Southdale. Please do your job. Please stop trying to sneak taxes that will bilk the homeowners and make Edina even more expensive for residents who have lived here for most of their lives. Do your jobs and protect and respect the residents who already live here. With all due respect, I submit these comments. Thank you.
David Frankel, 4510 Lakeview Drive, Edina. The other day I received an email from a local realtor representing the Minnesota Realtors Association. I have nothing to do with the real estate industry. They contacted me to send an email to the city council about this deed transfer tax. All I can say is you're taking on the Minnesota State Realtors Association on this issue. It's going to be a huge expense and waste of time to do that, because they're going to go to the state legislature and lobby heavy against this. Again, have nothing to do with it, but you're taking on a large lobbying organization, and you should be aware of that. The other issue is, which is going to come up today, not part of what Chad Milner is going to request, but I was over at the pedestrian bridge over here in Grandview yesterday. I can tell you, I don't know any teenager that a piece of chain across a sidewalk or a bridge is going to stop them from going underneath it. If you go over there today, you can see the footprints in the snow. People are using that bridge that is closed. If you're familiar with the Southwest Light Rail transit system, when they closed the pedestrian bridge over Beltline Road, they put in a chain link fence that was locked to the bridge. Couldn't get around it if you tried. We need to do something similar to that bridge to keep people off of it. A piece of chain link is not going to stop people, and it is not currently stopping people. There has to be a higher regard for safety in the city of Edina. I can look at a chain link and say that's not going to stop me. It's not going to stop a teenager. We need to do better. We need to expect more out of city staff to make things safer, because that sidewalk on the east side leading to that bridge does not have a rail on the north side, and it drops off from 5 to 10 feet. And that right now it's not being shoveled, so on top of having access, it's slippery, and people can fall off of it. Do we need the liability of that? The whole section of that sidewalk should be closed with a chain link fence. I'm not making this up. Go over to the Perkins site when that was under construction. The whole construction site had a chain link fence, safety chain link fence around it. It is the norm of a construction site to be fenced off and locked at night. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Frankel. Anyone else? Do we have anybody that's called in that wishes to speak to the council?
I have no callers.
All right. Let's, hoping you folks will stick around for the conversation, because I just want to assure anybody that's listening in or in the audience that this council and this HRA has not tried to sneak anything by anybody. In fact, we've been pretty good about corresponding with people and telling folks about the process and the notion under which some of these ideas came up from an outside group that was working on future housing affordability issues, and that we knew that it hadn't been vetted, but I think staff thought when we were working on our legislative platform that we should be talking about all issues that were germane to a potential legislative platform. And that's how it ended up in the legislative platform for discussion purposes only in a work session. And it was jettisoned from the legislative platform in the work session from the council standpoint, and jettisoned from the legislative platform the council adopted. But we had to deal with it from an HRA standpoint too, because we wear two hats. So nobody's trying to sneak something by here or do something that bilks homeowners. And I've corresponded with many people in our community over this issue, and I'm willing to keep corresponding with them with respect to these issues that come in, or these concerns that come in with regard to this issue. It's bothersome to us because we live here too, we pay taxes, and we are trying to do the best that we can for the residents of our community, being ever mindful of everything that affects all of us. So a little grace, a little civic trust would be appropriate, I think. So we're here in a representative capacity to serve you, and we're doing that. All right, so let's move on then. Does the Executive Director have any comments?
No, and we didn't have any comments at our last HRE meeting on December 5th.
And the consent agenda, Is there anyone that wishes to remove an item from the consent agenda?
Yes, I would like to remove item A. This is just about process and doing things in a logical order, and that is it. Oh, also item D, sorry.
D or B?
D.
Okay. All right. Anybody else wish to remove anything from the consent agenda? Items with respect to the consent agenda, with the exception of items 6A and D, is there a motion to adopt the other two items on the consent agenda?
So,
Second?
We got a motion and a second to adopt the consent agenda with the exception of items A and D. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adopting the consent agenda with the exception of items A and D, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. All right, let's move then back to, do you have a preference, Member Risser?
we can
Commissioner
take them sequentially.
Okay. Appointment of the Executive Director of the HRA, which is typically the, in the world we operate in, the Executive Director is typically the City Manager. Member Risser, what was your thought there?
I really want 2024 to be about transparency and process and doing things in a logical sequential order. We did not follow through the original meeting on January 3rd to talk about the city manager's contract was canceled, and we're doing it on the 16th. So I would just respectfully request that we do this in a logical sequential order and just table this until we have had that dialogue.
Commissioner Agnew.
Thank you. So is your concern that if, for example, one of the outcomes being that a contract wasn't renewed, that we would be stuck in a situation where the city manager were still serving as our executive director?
That's part of it. It just seems illogical, that point. But the other thing is we really need to do better about being transparent and doing things in a sequential manner, I think. And so this just really does seem kind of as if I could see it being interpreted in different ways. And I just really think that we need to start doing things in a way that is logical. But, so to your question, yes, it is. That is part of it. But it is also about community trust and not creating the opportunity for a narrative to get out there that is countering community trust. Just having everything done in a way that makes sequential sense.
Commissioner?
And so I know I don't really need to do this, but I am just going to do this. So the sequence of this was actually all set up to be just fine. And when my father passed away in November, I let Manager Neal know that I couldn't be at that session. And so because of that, we needed to adjust the schedule. But had that not happened, then this would have flowed the way it was intended to. We would have had the conversation, we would have gone through the debrief, and then we would have be at the point where we could make the appointment to follow process. And so in this case, I don't disagree with what you're raising at all, but I do want to say I do appreciate the fact that we could be flexible because I just couldn't be here for a couple of weeks. So I just wanted to give that context as to why this was done.
Thank you.
Our executive director let us query you about if we hold off on this issue until after we deal with the evaluation of your performance over the last year at our next meeting of the City Council. Is that a problem from having somebody in place to be the executive director for the beginning of the year?
It is not. My contract is a contract that auto-renews under the same terms and conditions, and including in that contract is this reference to the executive director of the HRA appointment as well. So those positions carry over until they are materially changed by the council.
All right. Other thoughts from commissioners as to whether to hold this matter over until we discuss the city manager's potential contract renewal?
If it doesn't cause any issue, I don't see any reason not to wait. I mean, to me, it's kind of 6 of one, half dozen of the other.
Okay. What was our next HRA date? January
25th.
Yes, January 25th.
Okay. And we're dealing with your evaluation, I think, on the 16th.
16th.
Yeah, okay. All right, is there a motion to move the potential appointment of the executive director of the HRA to the meeting of the HRA on the 25th of January?
So moved.
Second.
All right. Any further discussion? All those in favor of the adoption of the motion stated say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. And then the draft minutes. Commissioner Risser.
My concern is that our comments keep getting reduced to asked questions and provided feedback, or asked questions and made comments. And so the minutes do not capture the concerns of the commissioners. And this also happens at city council meetings where we bring up issues and they're not even noted in the minutes. And I think that silences the voice of us, and we are here representing the public. So I think that is a problem. I think it also makes it easier for things that come before us that maybe we weren't really sure of or felt like we needed more information being interpreted with just that brief analysis of our feedback, not even no analysis of our feedback. It makes it seem as if we're completely on board with what was captured in the text that describes the staff communication. So we need to do better about capturing the concerns and issues that council is raising during these HRA meetings. Thank you.
Commissioner Jackson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I will respectfully push back on that a little bit. I think that our votes, once they're made, show the outcome of the discussion. And I understand your concern. I totally do, that we raise a lot of issues. There's a lot of detail we go into, and we need to capture that. But the minutes are a legal document, and I think once a decision is made, that's binding, regardless of the different elements that went into it. And I'm concerned that that will weaken the strength of our vote in the end, because like I said, the vote is binding. And I don't know what the answer is to capture some of the nuances of our discussion, but I think the minutes are not probably, I'm reluctant to change that in the minutes.
All right, so let's talk a little bit more about the purpose of these minutes. Director Benarott?
This is not the first time the council has had this sort of discussion about meeting minutes. Maybe Scott will recall the exact year, but when this matter was last discussed, the group at that time felt that the video was really the official record of the meeting, and that the meeting minutes paraphrase that for the legal document. If someone wants to see your exact comments, they'll watch the video or listen to the audio.
All right. Anybody else? Any other comments from commissioners? All right, having provided that information, Commissioner, do you want to move the adoption of those draft minutes of the regular meeting of November 30, 2023, and the special meeting on December 5, 2023? No? You don't want to move that? All right. Yeah, Commissioner?
I guess I see these as two different things. If we do need to revisit our methodology in terms of how we take minutes, then I think that's kind of a separate thing that we should do with staff. I don't think that has bearing on voting on these minutes unless there are issues within this document that are of question. But I think we can commit to having Manager Neal's staff come back, do some assessment on what we might be able to do to address the concern, or at least provide concise data points so that we can at least assess it and then make a decision based on that. So I kind of see these as two separate things.
So I would say that these minutes are being kept in accordance with a decision of a prior council, is what Director Benarott was getting at.
Yeah.
So if our council desires to change the level of content that's expressed in those written minutes, as opposed to using the video and the audio as a more official sort of record, or more complete record, we could certainly have that discussion, but for purposes of potentially adopting these minutes that are in front of us this morning, they were done in the manner in which it was directed by a prior council. So is there someone who would care to make a motion to adopt the minutes of the regular meeting, the draft minutes of the regular meeting of November 30, 2023, and the minutes of the special meeting on December 5th, 2023 of the HRA?
So moved.
Commissioner Jackson moves.
Second.
Commissioner Pierce seconds the adoption of the motion as stated, the regular minutes on November 30, 2023, and the special meeting minutes on December 5, 2023. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of those minutes as provided, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. All right, on to the reports and recommendations portion of the agenda. I'll turn now to Executive Director Neal to talk about some of the items on this portion of the agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the Commission. It is part of the bylaws of the HRA that we appoint officers at the first organizational meeting of the HRA every year. Current officers are Mayor Hovland as the chair, Commissioner Jackson as the vice chair, and Commissioner Pierce as the secretary. All of those positions are eligible for reappointment or reselection, and this is done by a majority vote of the council. By majority vote of the HRA.
All right, thank you for that. Questions for the Executive Director on this matter? All right, is there a motion to adopt a slate of officers as recommended?
So moved.
Commissioner Risser moves.
Second.
Commissioner Jackson seconds the adoption of the slate of officers as recommended. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of the motion stated, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. And now we've got a couple of engineering-related matters that we dealt with at the City Council, and our Director of Engineering, Chad Milner, has more information on these particular items for the HRA.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioners, as the Mayor mentioned, as the Chair mentioned, this was at your previous council meeting. We had a discussion on the reasons for these change orders. There was a discussion that I didn't provide enough detail in those reports. So provided the details that I spoke to at the last council meeting. So those details are in there. It's related to soils, utility crossings, the aesthetics. That was a piece done after the original award of this contract. So we are again asking for approval of this. Both these items, these change orders, one was with the contractor to do the extra items, and the second one was with the engineer to review them to make sure that the bridge and everything else is built safely and to state standards. So I would request approval of those two change orders to match what the council did last week. I stand for any questions.
Questions for Director Milner on these two items? Okay. All right, stand by. So first, we've got two motions. One is the motion to approve the request for purchase for change order number one, and thanks for the greater detail. Appreciated that as well. For Grandview Pedestrian Bridge Engineering Services with Kimley Horn for $70,000, as Director Milner mentioned, already approved by the council. Is there a motion from any commissioner to adopt that particular motion as stated?
So moved.
Commissioner Jackson moves. Commissioner Agnew seconds the adoption of the motion to approve the request for purchase for change order number one for the Grandview Pedestrian Bridge Engineering Services with Kimley Horn for $70,000. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of the motion as stated, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. And then we've got change order number 2. Director Miller discussed that as well, and that was some changes we had to make on the bridge, and he's provided more detail around that. That's a significant number for Pembroke companies. The work's already been done. They've been paid. That's $269,489.20. Is there a motion to approve request for purchase number 2, change order number 2?
So moved.
Second.
Commissioner Jackson moves. Commissioner Agnew seconds the approval of change order number 2 for the Grandview pedestrian bridge with Pembroke companies for $269,489.20. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of the motion as stated say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Motion's approved. And now we will switch over to the item that we were going to take up in work session, which is something that we handled in work session for the City Council a few weeks ago. And
And it is
I think
after 8 o'clock.
you wanted Executive Director Neal, did you want to provide any initial information? Because I'm going to turn to Commissioner Pierce to talk a little bit about this.
The only initial information, Mr. Chair and members of the Commission, I would provide is that we are continuing to refine our discussions around the state legislative agenda package. That item is going to be on your council meeting agenda for next Tuesday. Yes, it's true that the session does not start till February 11th, but really this is a very busy time to do advocacy and to work with legislators to get things in the right positions. So it's important that we make an approval of what we're going to be advocating for this year. The particular items that are in front of you today are in front of you at your request, right? On December 19th, we held a work session where we talked about some of the components of the affordable housing finance section. Council asked that those items be removed from that discussion that night and relocated to this discussion on January 11th. So that's where we are today.
All right, good. Thank you. Commissioner Pierce, I'll let you lead this discussion on this particular item that we talked about at the City Council level but have not discussed at the HRA.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So just a couple of comments. So we started this work about a year ago, and what we were trying to do is look at how much progress we need to make from a housing affordability perspective, and seeing that we had a gap, a sizable gap in funding, and we saw that we felt like we needed additional forms of housing affordability, maybe I'd say it that way, where our focus had primarily been on rental, and we really wanted to focus on having more housing affordability ownership. We talked about townhomes, things like that, and so looking at that, the thought was, maybe we should bring a group of residents together, which is what we did. I was a part of that team, that group, that work group, and we hired a consultant, and we did research across the U.S., started looking at potential ways to solve those two challenges. And coming out of that work, we had the work session that you've alluded to earlier, where the intent was to share that work product with the council and review some of those potential sources. So the idea was to try to come up with a fund that was, in the neighborhood of $40 to $100 million. So how do we do that? It's a big challenge. We looked at data to help us understand the gravity of the issue as we saw it. And so we did that work. And that is what was reviewed on the 19th. Coming out of that session, we agreed to have a second session And that actually would be what we're doing today, would be the second session. We had intended to do that earlier, but that would be what we're doing today. And so I would further just kind of reiterate, and you've already said this, Mayor, items 2.4 and 2.5 we made the request to remove those from the legislative agenda. The reason it is viewed the way it is online, I actually think goes back to a couple of points that Commissioner Risser added from a process standpoint. But we keep the continuity of what the topic was so that you can tie things together as they go through the process. And so that's why the agenda item says 2.4, 2.5. But we had already made the request to remove that from the legislative agenda. And I say that to just further make the point, that doesn't mean that the problem is solved. What this group came up with, there were far more than just 2 items in there that we thought we could use to help generate funding for housing affordability. So today, Manager Hawkinson is going to go through some of the data points that we used and share. I think originally we may have had in the neighborhood of 10 to 13 different sources, and then that group kind of whittled that down. And so you'll see what we'll review what we did back in December, that subset of items that we could use as sources. But then the intent is to have the conversation after seeing that and just talk about what kind of approach we might want to use moving forward to make progress against this. And so I think that's all I have to kind of tee it up, and then we can go through the deck.
Yeah, I think also my recollection from a sort of sequential or process standpoint was after you had finished doing this work for a year, I'd say in isolation from any knowledge that the rest of the council had, you came with your group and we had a work session one time and you were explaining some of the ideas that you'd come up with over that 1 year period of time, and we kind of parked it, and then the next time we saw it was on the 19th when we were talking about the legislative agenda, when it was potentially part of the legislative platform.
Right. And I think it is fair to say that it was not this group's intent to have these items actually be part of this legislative agenda. The intent was to discuss these things and then as a council decide which of them should we move forward with trying to further develop. And things kind of got out of sequence. And I definitely appreciate that. Things got out of sequence, but I'm sure we've all been trying to answer questions, and it's just hard to put it back in the box. Like everybody, I shouldn't say everybody, many people still think that we're voting on new taxes. And like it's easy for me, I'll just speak for myself, it's easy for me sitting here to point the finger. But I think a lot of this is because of some of the process, that the way things kind of occurred in sequence. And as I reflect on it, there are things that I could have done differently. I don't know if the outcome would have been different, but there are certainly things that I could have done different procedurally, given the gravity of the things that we're talking about, that perhaps could have eased some of this. And so I think there's accountability on both sides on it. And by both sides, I mean community leaders, residents, as well as myself as a council member.
Kind of to reinforce, I think, what you just said, which was very helpful. No council, no HRA had made any determination that we wanted this as part of a legislative platform. In fact, we didn't even know if we wanted to consider it, because we really hadn't had any discussion other than a presentation from your group about the things that you were working on. So
Right.
this was a work in progress, and unfortunately ended up on a legislative agenda, because I think it was the intent of all of us to have more conversation around it and have public input on it,
Right.
all aspects of it, before we got to any point in time where we'd even think about pursuing any kind of
Right.
pathway on potential alternative sources of funding.
Yep.
So, all right. Ms. Hawkinson.
So the issue of affordable housing has been discussed, long before I came around. I look back in old files and see that on community surveys, et cetera, there has for a long time been a call to address affordable housing. So the advisory group, we took it upon ourselves it was talked about for about a year prior to the group forming about how there was a need for a sustainable, affordable housing fund. So just some data points, because I want most of the time for you. As you can see from this graph, this is the affordability housing stock in Edina starting from 2014 to 2023, so fairly recent swath of time. The top bar, the dark green line, are homes valued at under $500,000, between $300,000 and $490,000. As you can see, in recent years, there's been a major dip in quantity of homes at that value. The bottom dark line are homes valued at under $300,000. And there used to be almost 18% of the housing stock was valued at under $300,000. And now we think that possibly by the end of 2023, there are none left. Meanwhile, on the yellow line shows homes valued at greater than $1 million. And that line has sharply increased in recent years. So this is based on median housing values from the assessing department. The median housing value today is $659,900. In 2020, roughly 2022, it was $304,000. It is estimated that in 10 years, the median housing value will be greater than $1 million. This is the median value. Another way of looking at housing costs in Edina is, and this is they're not hard numbers, this is Consumer Price Index. The top line is the cost of rent, and the bottom line is median household incomes. And so the cost of rent has increased threefold over incomes in the past since 1986. So it's not only housing values, but it's also rent costs have increased tremendously over time. So the comprehensive plan that was approved, that also includes land use component, and was said that we had a forecasted need of 1,804 new affordable housing units. And this was also approved by a following resolution later after the comprehensive plan was approved. Thus far, we have completed, and this is by 2030, thus far we have completed 18.7% of the call. Whether or not we even think we're going to achieve the 1,804, we have achieved 18% of that. There was also a Housing Strategy Task Force that was created by the City Council to look at how to implement some of these housing goals that were stated in the comprehensive plan and look at others, and they also had goals, and we are far short of those goals. So based on current funding available for affordable housing, we have $2.5 million available. And as I said, we've accomplished about 17% of our goals. The amount of money we have available for affordable housing will allow for roughly 8 single-family homes or a small percentage of one multifamily rental. And so that is all we have money for. And so the gap between the achieving even half of our housing goals stated in the comp plan versus the money that we have available, there's a huge gap. So this, as was stated by Commissioner Pierce, this advisory group that was primarily made up of staff and our city attorney, came up with 5 primary sources, with the 6th being the investment income off of those previous 5. So one of these was tabled earlier this year about the HRA levy, and the other 2 that were on that were the tear-down fee and the single-family transfer tax that would only occur at the time of sale, and those made up the bulk of this gap. So the current funding, as I stated, was $2.4 million. That's all we have left. And based on the housing goals that was, I think we didn't even take it to the 1804. I think it came to 900. So half of the goal was that we needed $1 million. And so this is the breakdown. So that's all the presentation.
We needed $100 million. I think you said
Yeah, the $100 million.
Yeah. Can you go back to, I'm sorry. Can you go back to the slide that shows the median home value right there? And so I wanted to just add a few points to this, because it is really complicated, and it is totally okay for us as a community to look at that and say, well, we're okay with that now. Where we are on this trajectory, that's fine. As a community, we're okay with that. And we can take that view. But I just want to reiterate what this means is that the median home value right now is $659 or $660. That means 50% of the houses are more expensive than that, and 50% of the houses are less expensive than that. And so in 7 years, it's going to be a little over $1 million. And the same statement is true. In 7 years, 50% of the houses are going to be more than $1 million, 50% are going to be less than $1 million. And so the way I look at this is I try to compare the two. And so that's what Manager Hawkinson is trying to articulate, is what that means to the housing stock. And it just simply means that we're going to have fewer homes in the housing stock that are more moderately priced. And I still say we just have to decide if there's anything that we want to do about that. And it could be that we don't want to do anything about it. Or it could be, let's get together and figure out what makes sense for us to do. And then the other thing I'll add within that context, if I had a conversation with a resident who felt like, well, the house that they're living in is going to be worth $1 million. They viewed this to say the property value was increasing, which is true. And so I asked them, that's a good thing for now, but do you plan to retire in that home? And they said, well, no, I don't want to retire in a home that's $1 million plus. I want something more reasonably priced. And my response was, I do too. When I retire, what we're looking at is the trajectory is suggesting that there's just going to be fewer options across the life cycle if we don't do something to increase or to ensure that we have housing affordability across the housing life cycle. And so that was the entire point of trying to do this work, to figure out how we could have more housing affordability across the entire life cycle, which includes rental, single-family home, first-time home buyers, all the way through to retired residents. That was the intent behind it. So I just wanted to highlight that, just to make sure we didn't just blow by the importance of that.
The other aspect of that sort of educational session that we had that I remember when you were talking about this before was, and maybe this was on a more personal level, but it's kind of that missing middle notion, or the fact, can our kids live here?
Yeah.
You know, because we have a lot of families that stay here and their kids come back.
Right.
And you were worried that, as I recall, you were worried about the price of the house going up to the point where if the kids can't afford to be here but want to be here, how do we assist with that?
Right.
Or should we?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. No, that's true.
All right. I think Commissioner Jackson had some thoughts that she wanted to share. I don't know what timing-wise, but
I have lots of thoughts.
okay.
But I want to
I think we all do.
Yeah, I just want to say some preliminary things. First of all, I want to thank Member Pierce for raising the issue and doing all the hard work that you did. There are really good things behind public notice and open meetings law and data practices. These are things that are very valuable to our community, but they're also constraints on work that we do as city council members. And so we have limited time to talk about these things. And I think the purpose of this meeting today is to begin, not to complete, but to begin a public conversation about where we want to go with our housing stock in Edina. And I want to make it abundantly clear that we will, as long as I have any say in it, we will have public input, whether it's including Better Together and at least one, if not multiple, public hearings or town halls where we can hear from the community, because this is a community problem. And what Member Pierce and his group did was some really deep, hard research into our options, and that was a lot of hard work, and I want to thank you for that. The transition from that deep, intense research to a public discussion is awkward. And I want to acknowledge that, because this is a complex issue. There are lots of moving parts, and we have rules that constrain how we can do things. And so, like I said, those rules are very good. We want to have public notice. We want to have advance notice of meetings. We want to have public availability. But it also makes it complicated in what we're going to do, because we have other business to do as well with our limited time. So we're making that transition to a public discussion. That's what we're here for today. And thank you for the research. And I'm just going to set the stage. I think I want to have a robust conversation with all of us talking. But I just want to set the stage with both of you, Mr. Chair and Commissioner Pierce, talked about variety of housing. And the Housing Task Force, the message that I got from that was an overwhelming desire to have a variety of housing options in our city, to have just a spectrum of housing. And that, to me, the life cycle of housing is a value that I'm carrying forward in this discussion, that I think that's something that everybody, and it was a really wide group that served on the Housing Task Force. It was not one point of view. It was every point of view. And the one thing that they agreed on very strongly was a variety of housing. So I'm just going to set that as the stage, and I'm really looking forward to hearing people's comments. Thank you.
Good. Commissioner Risser.
I think part of the frustration that I'm feeling right now and that I'm hearing from residents is there's two different pathways that are being presented. And dialogue from the December meeting, December 19th, from council was, we need more information. We do not have adequate understanding of what is being proposed. And I believe the term that we used was we were going to do a deep dive on all of these different forms of funding. And we did not, this is not a deep dive. Today is not a deep dive. When we look at the slides that we just saw in the presentation, we didn't talk specifically about these two forms of revenue generation. And I think to put it completely on single-family homes and not include commercial, industrial, all the TIF projects, all of those are going to be exempt from this proposed revenue generation. And what really makes me concerned is when I look at the January 11th memo from Housing Development Manager Hawkinson, the last sentence is, if the state legislature grants authorization to pursue these two funding sources, then the city would commence with the public process to gather public input prior to the fee and tax being implemented, if so approved. And that's a very different narrative than, oh, we're going to have public hearings, we're going to hear from the public. I would like to get the report from the Housing Task Force. I have not seen a full, I have not seen data on it. And when I looked at the material in the packet today and I ran through the slides, these are slides we've seen before. And I would like to say we have soared way beyond the number of market rate rentals that we're supposed to produce. By 2030, we have already produced 112% of that. And the other issue I have is I feel like we have resources and we have things we could be using now that we're underutilizing. And that, we talked about the bridge going back and forth from the old Public Works site and how that doesn't get you across to the grocery store. That's important because the Public Works site is HRA property. Why are we not, from the beginning of talking about putting a bridge there, really ensuring that people could go across the bridge with a cart and go to the grocery store and come back safely? So, we just kind of ignored that. There's other things we could be doing, looking at our code, ensuring that the lot coverage for lots that are 9,000 square feet or less remains the same as larger lots. That could encourage smaller homes. That would also make it more likely that these smaller homes, these older, well-constructed mid-century homes, don't get overshadowed by a big, large new house going up. So I realize I'm talking about a lot of things, but I want to make very clear, I really think the public input has to be before putting this on the legislative agenda. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Commissioner Risser. Commissioner Agnew.
Thank you very much. At the highest level, I think introducing more affordable housing into Edina is important. And I think that's why we're having this conversation. When I look at some of those reports, there was the one that talked about rent and income. I think it'd be interesting to see also the increase in housing value with required annual salary to achieve that house. Because I think that's the heart of it, right? When you're talking about being in a house today that might be worth $650,000, and in 7 years it's going to be $1 million house, that, convince me that's a bad thing, right? But there's a bigger picture to it. There's bigger implications of that, of if you're trying to sell it, now the people that can buy it is a much smaller population, because I think that the heart of it is salaries are not increasing at a pace to keep up with the affordability of that $1 million house. And so that's where I think, when I think about process and change management, step number one is really making sure that we're articulating the problem well. And I think that, we know a lot about this issue. I think that we have an amazing coordinator that has helped pull together this imagery and this story. And so I think it's just about telling people, why does this impact you? Why is this important? And I mean, Commissioner Pierce, I think you did a really nice job of leading into that. And so then, right, if we have that information and we agree that it's something that we want to tackle, that's where we then start talking about what are the ways that we tackle it. And I know that we have our recommendations from the Met Council, and we're tracking that at a really good level. And I think Commissioner Risser pointed out nicely that, yeah, we're over on some of the targets, especially for market rate housing. And so when I think about my priorities very specifically, and I think that Commissioner Pierce said that he shared in this, is how can we introduce more owner-occupied options? And so then, and I think I see some head nods, I think that there's some agreement, right, that that's where our priorities are as a council. Then it's like, okay, how do we do that, right? And there are a couple of mechanisms that we've already been utilizing at the city level. I think that we should be doing, and this is probably worth another deep dive, and I know we don't have unlimited resources, but trying to evaluate what the ROI is. Right, so we know exactly how much we're putting into some of these programs. What is the impact of that? And I don't mean ROI from a purely what is the return to the city from a dollar perspective, because a lot of it is going to be, what do you call it when it's not dollar value? It's just like, yeah. What are the intrinsic values that we're getting as a part of our community? And you can tie that to the fact that we want to have more affordable housing. And so then we kind of go through this plan. There are a lot of really great options that are in front of us. But then again, right, at a city level, we're resource constrained, both from the dollars that we have as well as staff capacity. And so I don't necessarily think that we need them to do a deep dive on the 10 to 13 different items. We had the 5 that were on the list. And even as we think collectively about, whether it's a tear down fee, whether it's the HRA levy, I think we had a really good starting point. And so I think what I would prefer as being a next step is, should we have some type of, a community dialogue or like a town hall, like some type of discussion where people can feel heard and being a part of the solution. Because I know that there are a lot of people in this community who want us to prioritize affordability, right? You hear from people, my kids can't afford to move back here. I don't know where I'm going to move into and I don't want this 5,000 square foot house, right? So there are people who are part of this community that want to, I think, be a part of the solution. And so maybe that's the next step, is to continue engaging them, because they have definitely been engaged, but engage them on a larger scale so that people feel bought into the solution, and then it doesn't feel like we're rolling a rock uphill. Right? We're not facing, and there's always going to be people who disagree with it, but then we have more of that broader community support, and we feel really good about some of the decisions we make. And I was speaking to a realtor yesterday, one who lives in Edina, and his position was, should we just do something that there's a tax increase for everyone, which I think could be like the HRA levy is one of the examples. That was more appealing to him as one singular person than something that would impact, home sales. It's like, he wants to solve the same problem too. And so it's just, how do we bring in more people to the discussion, make it feel like we are listening to everyone in the community, and help that shape the mechanisms that we choose from our list of what to enact next.
Yeah, good, thank you. Commissioner Pierce.
Thank you. I just wanted to make you made me think about this. So we have been working on this in some shape or form for a year. And sometimes when you start at a point, you do kind of lose track of where you are in the process. But the original question I asked Manager Hawkinson is, what was our goal and what's the gap? And so, right, here's the goal, here's the gap, here's how much money we need to close that gap. And then the question was just, wow, if that's what we think we need to close the gap, can we even come up with a way to raise enough funds to close the gap? And that was kind of where we started. It was never the intent for the work product from that group to be something that would come to council, we would vote on it, and then we would go forth and make it happen. The idea was to bring back that context to say, here's the burning platform, here's how much we think we need, here's what the gap is, here's some things that other communities are doing, and then come back to the council to say, all right, does any of this make sense? Which of these things do you think makes sense for us to go forward with, to develop? And part of that process would be community engagement. It was never the intent to say we should do 2, 3, 4, and 5, and then go build a work plan to do it. But as I sit here and listen to your comments, which I agree with, I do think you kind of lose sight of, lost sight of the process, because we started and we just kind of keep going. But that was never the intent, that we would have a work plan, right, to present the council to move forward on. It was to have the conversation, and then from that conversation, there might be things that would go on a work plan that we would then go forward to develop. So we're at the preliminary stages of this work. Although when you look at it, it is quite dense material, but it is just the start of it.
Commissioner Risser, go ahead.
I really would thank you for what you just noted. It would be super helpful for me and the public to see more of the information that came out from this task force. And I feel as if somebody were to come and ask me what the funds would be used for, I couldn't adequately explain it. And if somebody said we need to have housing that is not rental, I couldn't tell them what the vision was. And I need to have that information. And hearing what Commissioner Pierce just said about it was never our intent, that does not line up with the material for this meeting. Again, the January 11th memo says there are 2 items. Number 1, seeking authorization to impose a demolition fee. Number 2, authorization to impose a single-family transfer tax. That is on this memo that is before us today. And so those are, and I feel like this meeting is going to end up being summarized that council heard all this information, asked questions, raised concerns, and it'll appear as if, oh yeah, we said go ahead, put the demolition fee and the transfer tax on the legislative agenda. And for me, I think that's really problematic, particularly because we have posted the legislative agenda on Better Together, and those 2 items are not on it because we asked that they be removed. So there's a lot of disconnect here, and it's really super, super frustrating. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd say be patient because I think we're going to get there.
Okay, good.
Yeah. So, and that's some of the things I'm concerned about too, is that I think residents want to know. I mean, we've already decided as a council those 2 elements are not going to be part of our legislative agenda, and this is us sitting with our HRA hat on, having that same conversation. So, just to kind of, well, I think Commissioner Risser, you raised the point I've been raising with people I've been corresponding with on process choices. There was the process choices you said that Member Hawkinson thought might be appropriate. That's if you guys are interested in this further, go to the legislature to find out if they'll even give you the authority to talk to people about it. Or my preferred choice, along with I think your preferred choice and probably everybody else's, is what are we trying to do here first? I mean, we're at the threshold. We're at the front end of defining a problem that's global in nature as it affects our town. And I think there's a distinct difference between the issue that you're hearing here about housing affordability and affordable housing, and sometimes people get mixed up about what we're talking about, because if you're listening to this conversation, you're hearing us talk about folks that have lived in our community for a long time that want to sell and stay here. But if they sell a 4,000 square foot house and they're going to move to a 1,500 square foot condo and it's the same price, they haven't banked up any of their equity. So that's one category. Member Pierce talked about that. The other is our kids. Can they afford to live here? There's the conversation around rental versus ownership. And as we've talked about this housing affordability issue, I feel like over time I've started to trend more towards concentrating on ownership, which is what Member Agnew mentioned, because I think that what I hear the data from our former state demographer Hazel Reinhart, that we're birthing 10,000 fewer kids a year in the state of Minnesota. And this doesn't include any conversation around immigration, but a lot of school districts are worried about the future of their district and the strength of the district because of the lack of kids coming up through the system. So where we know the kids are in homes, single-family homes. And in some communities, they're also in townhomes, like out in Eden Prairie. We're missing product here from an ownership standpoint. And so as we kind of embark on this conversation, and I think it should be a community-wide conversation. I've already met with one of the heads of one of the real estate companies. I met yesterday with a mortgage banker. What are the issues that they're seeing that face our community from an ownership standpoint? But that does take me full circle back from an HRA standpoint into this proposed tear-down fee and single-family transfer tax. And of course, that's what's precipitated so many of the emails that we've gotten. I think was it 2.4 and 2.5 on the legislative agenda?
Yeah.
And I think to Member Risser's point, and I was going to get there this morning as well, I think people in the audience and people at home and people that are going to pay attention to what we did here this morning are going to want to know not only whether we suggested including that or taking out of the legislative agenda, but whether we think those ideas have any merit at all for any further discussion. And so I'd be interested in people's thoughts on the latter. I'm assuming that we're going to have a consistent sort of outlook on this legislative agenda, that if the council doesn't think that it should be part of our legislative platform, I'm assuming the HRA doesn't think it should be part of our legislative platform either. So that's an assumption that I'm making, but I hate to make an assumption about whether this is something we want to consider in the future. I've got my personal opinion, but I don't know if we want to address this issue today or not and put that issue to bed. So I'm interested in conversation around that as well from commissioners. Commissioner Risser.
I really feel strongly that if, as we move forward and we think about generating revenue, we need to have a clearer picture of how we're going to use it. And I think we can't decouple that. I also think putting a transfer tax only on single-family homes is not fair. It has to be all property across the board, and then it could be a smaller amount. So I feel very strongly about those two things. I haven't thought about the demolition tax or fee that much. I do think it could get rolled over and, impact the seller and the buyer. So I don't think it would really impact the builder. But I've again, feeling like I'm repeating myself, I do not have the information I need in order to comment on these things. I need to get more information from the task force. So that's where I am.
All right. I'm going to go to Commissioner Pierce.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. As a business leader, I don't solve problems in that sequence, in that order. And so I get that, but I come at it from a different perspective. And so I would say we don't have enough information to decide on any of those things. But I think they all have merit. And so would I support a transfer tax? I think I would at this stage. But if you just take that one, right, you have to look at, well, then how would you even institute that? What would be the level that you might do it? There's just so much work that has to go into evaluating whether or not something is the right thing to do or not. And so the way I would do this is I would not take anything off the table. I would, and I've had this conversation with, just last night with a realtor as well. I would pull a group of people together. And I asked the question last night of the realtor, okay, you don't think the tax, the 2.4 and 2.5 are the right thing to do. All right, well, here's the problem we're trying to solve. Do you think you could get 3 realtors who will engage in this as a topic and help us figure out, well, what does work? What might work? What could be a solution? So to me, that's what I would do, is get a group of residents, and I don't know what the right label would be for that, to then help us figure out what options we would take forward to further develop. This list was just that, to say, well, here are some things that other communities have done. We don't know if these will work for our community or not, but I don't, just from the process of problem solving, I wouldn't take a solution off the table unless I had data to support this is not something that we want to do. And I would need more than I would need really good evaluation to say, yep, that's not going to work for us, or we don't want to do it, or this is the range we might think about doing it in. And we just aren't at that point, and we were never intended to be at that point today. So I wouldn't take anything off just in that context, but I would engage the community, find the right folks to help solve the problem, which is probably a developer who does single-family homes. I could see them being part of it as well, to really help us figure out what's the best thing to do.
Thank you, Member Pierce. I'm going to go now to Commissioner Agnew and then back to Commissioner Jackson.
I think the funding component is definitely maybe half of the equation. And then as Commissioner Risser pointed out, right, the other half is what will we do with it? And I think that for me, I don't require the what we'll do with it in specificity before figuring out the funding mechanisms. I think that for me, for us to say that we believe in owner-occupied kind of investments, we could put in a couple of examples of what does that mean. But I'll use the example of the public works site, right? I don't know what's possible here. Like, this is just me thinking off the cuff, right? But if we said with that site, we would love to invest in townhomes, owner-occupied, affordable units on that site. Well, that's something that like we would need to decide and then have the funding for to go forward and decide. If we said that's what we want to do, now let's go and think about instituting a tax and get that tax, get that income, and then we can go ahead and invest in these programs. Like, all of a sudden we may have lost our opportunity to do that project, maybe not that specific one, right? And so I think that's where we need to identify the top level goals and a couple of examples of methods or mechanisms that we would use, but not necessarily to the level of this site, this many units. You know, it's going to be somewhere in the middle when we think about how it's going to come to fruition, because we might lose some opportunity.
Yeah, thanks for that. Commissioner Jackson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So first of all, I'm not in favor of moving these two items to the legislative agenda. I just want to make that really clear. But we've had this is a great conversation. I'm so happy we're having this. And to me, we've got this overarching desire to have a healthy community. What does that mean? That includes some affordable housing. What does affordable housing mean? And then we start getting really complicated. 2 points I want to make. One is that we take for granted that America has a middle class, and I want to make it perfectly clear that the middle class is something that's created. It's not a naturally occurring thing. You know, we had lords and serfs, right? And then things were created for middle class to thrive. And so it's going to take some intervention to keep our middle class in Edina. And so we've got a couple of things coming that are going to precipitate a more intense conversation. We've got the public works site. We have land for the new Fire Station 2 that is going to sit idle until we decide what to do with it. We're going to have the old Fire Station 2 that was going to sit idle until we decide to do with it. And there's a fourth one. I can't remember what it is. But anyway, so we've got some public land coming online, and that's going to precipitate a really intense conversation about what we do with that. And, you know, the way to do we want to maximize the money? Do we want to maximize the opportunities to have that life cycle housing in our city? And so we're going to have to get granular pretty quickly. We're going to need both zoning laws and money to do that. And so we're going to have lots of public conversations. My feeling is that I'm not going to impose a tax until we have strong public support for the goals that we're getting there. And tax is a means to an end, but it's also something that's imposed on everybody regardless of choice. It's the law, and it's enforceable by law. And so we have to take this very, very seriously. The terms of what a transfer tax would look like if we wanted to implement that we need to get information. We need to have lots of public buy-in on that. But I just want to emphasize that I support having economic diversity in our city. I think it makes our city stronger. I think the market left to its own devices in our current system will wipe out the middle class in our community. And I think that with tear downs and tall apartment buildings, we're going towards a community that we won't recognize. Based on when I moved here in 2000, it already looks very different. And I think people are kind of reeling from the pace of change. So what are we going to do to interrupt the market? That's the conversation that I want to have. I think, like I said, we've got some public land that's going to come online that's going to precipitate, the Art Center, that's the fourth site. So it's going to precipitate a conversation, and then, as Member Agnew pointed out, we're going to have these opportunities, but we're not going to have the tools to address it. So we've got to start building those tools. But, how we're going to raise the money, how much we want to raise, what the tools look like, I'm not there yet. And we'll get to that. We've got some that are existing. We've got state funding coming online. We've got existing dollars. And we can start having the conversation, but we'll see the need in graphic terms, I think, pretty rapidly. If we want to have affordable, whether it's a cooperatively owned small density apartment, whether it's townhomes, whatever it is that we're going to be talking about, it's going to need money, and we're going to need to raise that. So we've got a lot of research, good research done for a start, but we're going to have some pretty clear goals to let the community know what it is that we're raising taxes to fund. And that's the order I would take it in. And I hope that we can get some more details on what people are going to be seeing in our community before we start raising taxes. But we are going to need more money to accomplish those goals. Thank you.
Commissioner Pierce.
Yeah, thank you. You did ask a very specific question, and I just want to make sure I also specifically answer. Just reiterating, I do not believe 2.4 and 2.5 should be part of the legislative agenda, right? I love what Commissioner Jackson said, because I agree completely with it. So I'm going to go a step further. I don't think 2.4 and 2.5 should be part of the legislative agenda. And I don't actually think we should go forward with any of those action items without having very structured feedback from the community. And how we do that, I'm not sure. We certainly are getting lots of emails. And so I use the term structured, right? We see things coming out of next door, but I'm using the term structured because a lot of that feedback isn't structured toward solving the problem. A lot of it is just specifically talking about one or two items. And I think to solve that problem, which is funding and uses, we need that input. And so if we don't have a construct to ensure that we get that kind of feedback, then I don't think we should move forward with any of them. And so the intent was to frame the conversation, which is what we're having. But I do think in order for us to do anything, and I say it that way, and you mentioned this as well, Member Jackson, to even do one of those items requires policy zone changes, right? To even do one of them, we have to look at within the city, what does that mean if we're going to, as an example, divide a lot so that you can put 2 townhomes on it, 2 separate addresses. We can't do that easily today. And so even that, which has nothing to do with taxes, requires work for the city to do. And so I think even with that, that's why I say I don't think we should move forward with any of those things without community support, because there's going to be a lot of work that has to happen at the ground level to even enable them.
I think I feel comfortable representing to people here or in the audience virtually that from the HRA standpoint, 2.5 and 2.6 are not going to be part of our recommendation from this HRA, and I don't think we need to.
2.4,
2.5. Was it 5 and 6, or was it 4 and 5?
4 and 5.
Okay.
Yeah. You said 6.
2.4, thank you. We're going to be part of any legislative agenda proposed. But this has been a galvanizing sort of item around which to build this conversation that we need to have as a community. And so as I've been talking to the head of the Coldwell banker and a mortgage person yesterday who owns their own mortgage company, the conversation around what they think we are missing in terms of product that they're seeing in other communities. What are the possibilities from a lending standpoint, and then getting ourselves as a HRA or a council more educated on what are the possibilities. And then when we're more educated, we can have a more engaged and informed conversation with the public. But then I think a series of public meetings to make presentations on these issues. And as Member Pierce says, Commissioner Pierce says, maybe people will think we don't have an issue at all. Maybe just let the market prevail, and that's the outcome of this whole thing. But I think we need to be thinking about what we think is best for Edina. What's best for us as a community in terms of thinking about, do we perceive this as a problem? And if it is, then what is the problem and how do we go about working on it? And then things will flow from that, I believe. So then even, I think with the mortgage lenders, even the conversation about funding might flow from that, funding possibilities. And I think until we know that landscape, I'm reluctant to talk about any funding choices other than what we know we have now, or what we have available. And I also think that there's that more fundamental conversation about, if we think there's an issue here, do we want to concentrate more on homeownership side or rental side or a combination of both? I don't know if we really answered that question either. We've done some work around on the rental side, but and we've got our Edina Housing Foundation, which is unusual for a community to have a housing foundation. Work on the ownership side, but potentially enhancing that second mortgage program for first-time home buyers or our children that want to come back to Edina from other parts of the country. How can we help them get up and get going? And maybe they don't need any help, but I think there's just a lot of conversation to be had here, so we can decide as a community which way we want to head with respect to this issue, if we want to head any direction at all. So do we need you want a formal motion on this elimination of 2.4 and 2.5 just to kind of?
I think it might be helpful for us as we articulate what the status of those issues are.
I think it provides the clarity we need internally and also externally. Is there a motion to exclude items 2.4 and 2.5 from the legislative agenda from the HRA perspective?
So moved.
Second.
We got a motion by Commissioner Edina, a second by Commissioner Pierce to eliminate items 2.4 and 2.5 from the legislative agenda from the HRA perspective. Any discussion? All right. All those in favor of adoption of the motion as stated, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. The motion's approved. The HRA does not want to see those particular items in the legislative agenda. Yes, Commissioner Pierce, thank you. And thanks again on behalf of all of us for doing all this work for the past year and thinking about this problem.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I didn't want to blow by the comment that you made, so we just voted on 2.4 and 2.5. It's not on the legislative agenda. All right, and so we did vote on that, but then the other thing that I think that you said or alluded to, and I don't want to blow by this, we shouldn't just close in the meeting today and just keep going as we are. Like, we just had a great conversation, And so we're not voting on how we move forward, but I do think it is incumbent on us to just make the commitment that we are going to move forward, and and maybe that looks like having a town hall or something like that to help answer those questions, making sure people have clarity around what the problem is, and really giving an opportunity to say, yeah, we think it's a problem that we actually want to address as a community. So I think we should have some kind of commitment around that from today, in my opinion.
I think that's my sense of the conversation today, is that we need a lot more input. We need a lot more education. We need a lot more input from community, and let's leave it up to our staff to think about next steps. We'll charge them with that.
Okay.
Commissioner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I want to go back to Commissioner Risser's comments at the beginning about the minutes. So I think, given the fact that the way our system is set up, we do have the recording, and we were online, so everybody could watch live and go back and watch again in the thing. But I'd like to have some sort of motion so that the minutes also reflect that we are making a commitment to a public discussion about housing, life cycle housing and affordability in our community. And I think that to honor your concerns, that we do get that memorialized both in our legal documents as well as in the broadcast of this meeting.
Was that a motion?
Yeah, do we need a motion to that effect, or just, I think if we have council consensus that, or I mean HRA consensus that that should be in the minutes.
Certainly.
Make sure it's in there.
So
Ms. Olson?
Okay, good. All right, thank you.
And why don't you send a draft to Commissioner Jackson, what you put together from a minute standpoint. We'll make sure it reflects the intent of hers and the HRA generally.
Terrific.
Because she'll have a sense of that.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so a broader conversation to be had, and we'll just move forward from here. Any other thoughts on that issue, members? Okay. Any updates or anything you wanted to talk about, Mr. Executive Director?
No, Mr. Commissioner, not today. Thank you.
Okay. HRA Commissioner comments, anything? All right. Okay. I was going to say I was in Washington on Monday, and I'll save that for the council meeting. Talk about that. All right, and then is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Commissioner Agnew moves. Commissioner Pierce seconds the motion to adjourn. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. We stand adjourned.